Hi all, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So this week I want to do something a little bit different and show you how I prepare my colour studies for my pieces, the final pieces that I do, so like what I did for my wonderment piece in my very first art vlog. So the piece that I'm going to be working on today, you're going to see in a moment because I'm going to be finishing off the sketch there. I've already sketched out the portrait. The portrait, actually, the idea came from this particular spread and this portrait in particular. So I've redrawn her already and we're going to be putting in the moths and doing the background of the piece, and to be honest it's quite early in the evening, so I may even be able to get a little bit more, if not all of it, done this evening. So we'll see how far we get. Let's get straight to it.
Okay, so we're starting off with sketching out the moths. Now, as you can see in the corner, I am using my phone to help me draw out these moths. Now, the piece that I'm actually using is from my weekly vlog, and that's where you can see me create that spread and also the other night scene spread that I'm going to be using to create this background. Now, I like doing these smaller thumbnails to build up these pieces. Colour studies generally, I'm aware most artists tend to do smaller actual thumbnails of each colour study, whereas I do these larger pieces, but I just find for me it just helps me get everything into the right position. I get the composition a bit better, and because I've already done the smaller thumbnails of the moths and the night scenes, I've already got an idea of how the colours are going to work. Now I just need to make sure it all works together. So yes, I prefer working on a larger scale, but that's just personal preference. Now, this background part, I am using my Reeves gouache for a start. I only ever use my Reeves gouache for the colour studies, simply because my Windsor and Newton gouache is a bit too expensive for me to waste on a colour study, so I'd rather use my Reeves gouache for that. And I also use cheaper brushes. Now, the downside to this is that when it comes to making the final piece with my Windsor and Newton gouache and my much nicer brushes, it can be a bit difficult because the colours are more saturated from a Windsor and Newton point of view. But I have started to do some swatches on the side, which is a lot easier at getting the right colours. For me, I just think that there's no point in wasting more expensive gouache on something that is just a colour study and it may not even go any further. Now, if you're more interested in the difference between my Windsor and Newton and my Reeves gouache, I have actually done a comparison video, but it is really important to remember that these Reeves gouache, they're a lot less saturated, and as you can see as I'm working on it here, I'm not really paying attention to what I'm doing at all. I'm using far too much water with my Reeves gouache, and those layers of colour I'm not even allowing to dry fully before I'm working on it, and it's all becoming a bit of a muddy mess. Now, I don't tend to do this with my Windsor and Newton gouache, one because I'm a bit more patient with it, but for this piece I was getting really fed up really quickly. I will explain that in a bit, why I'm just not feeling this piece at all. But here we have it, the massive jump forward in time. Now, as you can see, I've worked on the background a bit more. To be honest, I've completely overworked the background, but that is just one of the downsides to not being in the right mindset of creating art, and that was definitely what this evening was. But I wanted to show you the final bits where I'm putting in the little touches of white, which is gouache straight out the tube, just to try and put in a bit more texture.
Okay, so it's now gone 7 o'clock this evening. I'm going to leave it here for today. I could do more and just finish this colour study in one evening, but to be quite honest, this week's been really full on at my day job and I'm just feeling really burnt out. And even doing these backgrounds I was getting a bit stressed with, which is why there is such a big difference between where it started on those first layers to how it finished. And I didn't film it because I was finding even that a bit too stressful for me, so I had to just zone out, put my headphones on, listen to the Command Zone podcast and just let myself breathe. So that's how it got finished off and why there's that big change. But I'm going to leave it here for now, so I will catch you in a couple of days, although for yourselves it will literally be 2 seconds.
Okay, so it's actually been a week since I got back to working on this. I was so disappointed in the background and how overworked it looks that I just couldn't bring the motivation to actually get back to working on this piece. And it wasn't until I started working on a completely separate image that I then kind of thought, no, you know what, I really need to give this a try and just see how it goes. and I approached it slightly different. So as you can see, I'm using a much nicer brush, and I'm also using my Windsor and Newton gouache. Now, as I said, I don't normally use my Windsor and Newton gouache on a colour study, but for this I needed the high saturation of my Windsor and Newton gouache. Because I'd overworked the background so much, I needed a paint that was going to be able to compete with that background and be saturated enough that it can stand out. Otherwise, it was just going to look all copy and pasted and all like blended into each other. It just wouldn't have looked right. So I decided that that's how I was going to do it. And as you can see, I work in also a lot of blues and purples into the face so that it matches the background a bit more, just so I know I go on about it quite a lot in my videos now, but it's really important if you're going to be using a portrait, do try and blend in some of the colours that you're using on other things as part of this skin tone. It doesn't have to be massively noticeable, but even a little bit really does make a difference, because when you look at somebody, if you really pay attention, their skin tone isn't just one tone. It's made up of loads of different things, from light reflection of different things and bouncing off onto your face or whatever it may be. It really does make a big difference. Now, I'm sorry about the camera angle here. Basically, what I've realised and finally worked out is my camera can't focus on the image beneath if my hand positioning is right in front of the camera itself, which sounds really basic, but it's something that I was totally missing until now. So now that I've seen this part, I know why that's causing it. So if I keep my brush angled and my hand angled to one side, it's absolutely fine. But being dead on it, that's where that problem is coming in with not being able to focus on the background. But I did want to show you how I layer up the hair. And as you can see for this piece, I've actually taken time to work on the face a bit better, rather than what I was doing for the background and not allowing the layers to dry before working on them again. I've actually gone from doing a first layer of skin tone to then working on the hair to going back to skin tone, and then I'll go back to the hair, and it's just that gives it so much better time, especially with a medium like gouache or watercolour. If you don't give it time to dry between layers properly, the colours can get really muddied, and that was the problem that I was having on the background, and I just wasn't patient enough to fix it that evening. So yeah, so that's why I've kept that little bit in with, even though it's not focusing that well on the hair underneath, I did want to show that that's how I work on it slowly and why the colours are no longer muddying. Now I do eventually go back to using my Reeves gouache, simply because I realised some of the colours that I wanted from my Windsor and Newton I don't actually have yet, which I'm now going to be looking into getting. But yeah, I mean, with regards to this, I feel a lot happier. I think going for the more saturated gouache really did make a difference in making this piece feel a bit better. No, it's not 100%, that background is completely overworked, and the face, even then, yeah, honestly, there's something with that mouth. It really bothers me, but the initial sketch I quite liked, but this part, I think I just overworked too much of the piece in general. But overall, I've got an idea of where I'm going to take this piece, and that is the whole purpose of a colour study. So now I'm working on the little moths. I'm actually using my Reeves gouache again, just because I'm using the paint straight out the tube this time, rather than mixing any water. So again, they can be balanced out a bit better against that darker background. Yeah, I mean, the moths, to be honest, they were a bit easier to do. I did them a bit better than what I did on my weekly vlog and the initial thumbnails of different versions of these moths. So I was pleased with that. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep these colours. I may change them slightly, but I do like the consistency of, there's slight variation in colours, but I like the fact that they are consistent in sharing a colour between all of them. So as much as I did lots of different colour versions of these moths originally in my spread, that's in my weekly vlog, sorry, but for this time, I just kind of felt like there was little point in doing that, just because the background was so overworked as it was. I think I needed something a little bit more consistent to tie in the rest of the piece. Now I like to go in with my little fine liner, just putting in those details. The great thing about gouache and watercolour is that you're able to do that on this sort of medium really easily, and it's a bit more easier to do than with a paintbrush. But that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to give it a like and subscribe, and I will definitely catch you in next week's video. Until then, have a nice week.